This is the Mazda RX-7 Series 6 front hub that I'm going to use with the same stud pattern as the Magna. And I've already shared with you how I'm going to go away from using a Heim joint because of lack of movement there with a long travel suspension. So I thought what I'd do is try and find ball joints that would go in the top and the bottom of this suspension hub that had a plate on them with bolts which would allow me to make them adjustable and fabricate mounting plates. So I looked in the Mazda range thinking that was the place to start, and I found this. This is off a Mazda 323 front ball joint, and you can see it's got two mounting holes, but when it came, it's too big. It's the right style, but it's too big. After about 2 weeks going around various suspension shops, I found that there wasn't really any more a book with measurements in it so that I could look up a book and see what would fit. I had to basically buy them off eBay fairly cheaply, 50 bucks a pair they were, and see whether they'd fit or not. So that was 50 bucks down the drain. So then I went to this one. This is off a Mazda Unos, and I noticed in the picture that I could do a comparison between the bolt hole, which I knew would be standard, compared to the pin. And you can see the difference there. That pin is bigger than that hole, whereas this one's nowhere near as big. So like I said, that's a Mazda Unos, and it fits perfectly. So that's my bottom joint, all worked out, ready to go, and you can see how easy it's going to be to fabricate a plate, and I'll put a plate top and bottom and bolt right through. For the top, I took a punt and bought a pair of these. These are off a Toyota Camry, about a 2000 model, and they fit absolutely perfectly. So I've got the option of making both of these on the plates that they go to adjustable. And then I realised, particularly with the Heim joints being adjustable as well, I really don't need both of them adjustable. So I'm going to leave this fixed and make this one adjustable because it'll be easier to have the bolt holes sliding up and down on either side of the ball joint rather than in a line like they are on this one. So that'll be fixed, and this will be on a plate with elongated slots on it so that I'll be able to adjust the camber like that as much as I want. One of the fundamental rules of suspension design in this book is that the height of the inner wishbone mounting points must be equal to the height of your hub. And the way you measure that is from the middle of the swivel point of the top and the bottom ball joints. And I haven't been able to do that yet because I haven't had the ball joints. But now I've got them, I can get that measurement. And from there to there at the swivel point is exactly 10 inches. That's going to become a very important measurement as I fabricate these mounts. And what I'll do now is I'll make up a jig, a steel jig, that'll take two bolts exactly 10 inches apart. And that way I can position that top bracket exactly at the height where it needs to be. And then at the front top joint, this mount is going to have to be up around about here somewhere. So I'll have to fabricate a special bracket that'll pick up not only that tube but that reinforcing bar as well, and put that hole about there. Let's have a closer look at these brackets that I've fabricated for mounting the Heim joints onto the chassis. I've used the heavy walled rectangular tubing that I've got specifically for this purpose. I've put it in a drill press with a hole saw matching the diameter of the chassis tubing and drilled right through top and bottom. Then I've drilled a hole to take the bolt for the Heim joint and just cut the edges so it clears. And that'll go right on that tubing anywhere on the main chassis rails. just looking at the frame surrounding my front suspension mounting points. The rear lower brackets, which are just tacked in place, so don't judge the welding, have good cross bracing in the floor between them. Up the top rear mounts have bracing here and here across the top in the frame. In the front lower inner wishbone mounting points have that bar and the skid plate between them. But on the top, between these two mounts, which are just sitting here waiting to get welded in place, there's no strengthening there, and there's going to be a lot of force coming up through the suspension that way. So I'm going to put a bar in there. Here's how I notch my tubing for building the chassis. It's a big backyard, but I've got to use what I've got. Got my drill press vise and the pipe sitting at the angle that I've marked, and this hole saw is the same diameter of the tube that this is going to butt up to. It happens to be the same size as this, but if this was going to go up against a larger piece of pipe, obviously that would be a larger hole saw like that. One of the reasons why a build like this takes a fair amount of time is there's no blueprints, it's not a kit, you've got to design it and work it out as you go. The only plan for this creation is in my head. The positioning of these two rear brackets is determined by where the suspension upright is. The front one is determined by where that upright is, but this one could go anywhere on this rail, so I positioned it over the top of that upright, and I've taken a measurement and duplicated that distance on the other side at the top, so the two top mounts are square and the wishbone patterns are similar. The only thing that I haven't followed in that book is when he talks about the angles of these mounting points. He mentions how that most guys conventionally have a flat chassis and put the mounts parallel to the ground, but he says it's better to put the back mounts up for anti-dive suspension under brakes, so that when the car is loaded under brakes it won't dive as much. I've actually done the opposite. I've got these mounts at that angle so that it better aligns with the swinging and the compression of the strut that I'm going to put in there. I'm also compelled to do this by the shape of the chassis that I've got here with the bend in it, but this angle not being that way won't be a major factor, because he also mentions in the book that this can be overcome by stiff suspension rating. Time to look at the rear brakes on this off-road buggy that I'm building. You'll remember that this hub was originally the front hub on a Magna that I've used as the donor car for the motor and the gearbox in the back of this car. So this front hub has now become the back hub, and I've got to work out what to do with brakes. These are the discs that belong on that hub off the front of the Magna, but you can see they're way too big. I would end up with much too much brake on the back. The discs are double ventilated, and they don't need to be, and there was no handbrake mechanism on the caliper on the front, which I obviously need for rear steering brakes. This is the rear caliper off the Magna, and although it operated on a solid disc, this is of no use to me because it's got no handbrake mechanism. On the Magna, the handbrake is a separate drum brake that operates on the inside of the disc, and that just won't fit on that hub. What I'm going to use instead is a rear disc brake setup off a 1994 Honda Prelude. We just happen to have one in my workshop that we're wrecking for an engine swap, and I grabbed these. The stud pattern is the same as the Magna's. The centre hole was just a fraction too small, so I've just ground that out by hand with a grinder, and that disc goes straight on the Magna hub. You can see the disc brake caliper off the Prelude has got that handbrake mechanism on it that's operated by a cable that's separate to the hydraulics. So this is the setup I want to put on the back, and all I'll have to do is make an adapter plate to mount it in there. That should be fairly easy to do.